Welcome to C-Vision's third-party risk podcast with Bjørn Watne and Igor Volovich. Bjørn, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Igor.
Perfect. So, Bjørn, tell us about yourself. Tell us about where you work, and we'd love to know about you.
I have a career in InfoSec, obviously. It's coming up to 20 years now. Started out back in the day as a security analyst, worked my way through architecture, even a short spell in marketing. And now I'm in general management and still sort of keeping one hand on the technical wheel. So, started out in telco, did a bit of consulting. Last 6-7 years or so, I'm now in financial services, still doing the InfoSec.
Very cool. Tell us about the firm.
Oh, the firm, yeah. Well, it's the name is Storebrand in Norwegian. That's for an English-speaking person, it will look a bit like Storebrand, but it's definitely not a retail chain. The name in Norwegian, Storebrand, actually translates to big fire, and it is 250 plus years old now, and was actually founded in Copenhagen back in 1767 for the purpose of providing insurance or monetary payouts for the next big fire. So during the time of the tall ships, there were a lot of fires because it's cold in the north, and the ships were made of wood, and people were heating the ships with fire, and they tend to burn. So they put together this pot of money to pay for the next big fire, and there's your insurance company. And 250 some years later, it's still the same name.
That's very cool. Amazing story. You know, we don't have companies that old in America, of course, so that's very interesting and exciting. So, what is it like to work for a company that old, and how does it change the perspectives at the company? What's the culture like?
The culture is I would say it's quite solid because you build it over so many years, and it's sort of grown with the Scandinavian culture. So it's predominantly operating in Norway and Sweden, about 2,000 people. It is very solid. Everything was very solid, and if you look at in terms of the IT equipment, some of the systems that are running the current IT platform, they were put online before I was born. So we have that on one end, and we have going to the cloud on the other end. So we have the full spectrum. So it's definitely a challenge to work in this environment.
That's very interesting. So what are some of your biggest challenges in terms of security today?
Well, today I would say the pandemic is giving me a headache, and that is something that I would say maybe only today or the past 11 months. In general, digitalization, I think it's proving a challenge. And because of the pandemic, I heard numbers that they were saying something about we moved 5 years in one in terms of digitalization due to the pandemic. So that is big. Also, the rise of the adversaries. I mean, the threat actors. As we consume more and more digital resources, there will be more and more advanced threat actors on the market trying to sort of gain benefits and values. So the threat landscape, the digitalization. Those are the big main drivers, I would say.
That's very interesting. So you're running a company that's been around for a long time, and it's kind of grown organically. And what do you see some of the challenges that are on the horizon, and what are some of the topics of the day that tend to give you sort of a headache and keep you up at night?
Well, the emerging technologies and the speed in the way we consume them is giving me a bit of a headache. And as you well know, the financial services industry is extremely regulated. And one of the problems is that the regulatory bodies are not where the bleeding edge of technology is at all. And while we are eager to jump on the latest bandwagon of technology, somewhere along the road, the regulators will catch up to us and then maybe impose regulations that aren't very easy to follow if we're head over heels into this new technology. So especially now with the pandemic and the rapid digitalization, I'm a bit worried where we will be in like 1 year and 2 years when regulators are catching up to us. And I see that we are now like on the brink of an era where there will be like several major regulations coming out. And if we are too heavily invested in, it might be very expensive to get back up on a compliant platform.
Very interesting. Well, compliance versus security. We always have that debate with upper leadership and with the business folks, and that's never an easy conversation. They want to do the bare minimum and comply, and of course, we want to kind of be strategically secure, and that can be an overlapping set of goals, but sometimes not.
Yeah, it's. I think it's about risk management. I mean, you have your risk appetite. Everyone agrees, or at least top management, they have decided that they agree on something, and then it's all about sort of getting to within that risk appetite. And obviously, a breach of compliance is very often well outside of this risk appetite. So, if you have worked your way into the risk appetite, and then there is a new compliance sort of requirement that defies your current cloud strategy. Ouch. So there are many things to consider.
That's not uncommon. So you brought up risk, and I think that's a good segue for our topic of the day, which is third-party risk. And, everybody's talking about SolarWinds. I think that's been on everyone's mind. We even have legislators in the United States talking about it. There were a set of testimony earlier in this week, which actually Amazon, strangely enough, did not attend. And their position was that we did not get impacted by SolarWinds, so we really don't have anything to talk about, which is kind of an interesting and peculiar tidbit of news there. But I'm curious about what you're hearing within your enterprise environment, what you're hearing from your business leadership about these kinds of things, and how much is that sort of raising the specter of third-party risk within your own space, and how do you respond to it? How do you have that conversation, and how do you take SolarWinds sort of as a model of potential impact within your environment, and how do you deal with it today and proactively?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, we were also semi-affected by SolarWinds because, well, who wasn't? So our sort of our asset inventory didn't contain vulnerable objects in themselves, but some of our third parties had. And obviously we had to sort of do investigations and make sure that we were sort of checked out of all of this. But I think that if we look like not at SolarWinds specifically, but to third parties sort of in general, this is something that's for sure a challenge that we've seen over time. And as I was saying, in financial services, we are extremely regulated, and it has become even more so over the past just a very few years. Mm-hmm. The PSD2 directive came into play just a few years ago, and it enables third-party payment providers to sit between end users and banks like ourselves to provide some sort of service. And you see with the emergence of like your Facebook Pays, your Apple Pays, your Google Pays, there is this whole ecosystem coming together around financial services specifically. Mm-hmm. And obviously, this is good for the consumer, for the end user, and it's good for the businesses because it's easier for them to sort of sell their products and services. Mm-hmm. But there is a caveat, and there is a thing that especially the regulating bodies in the EU have seen, is that when everything becomes interconnected like this, everything is relying on everything in what is the financial sector. It creates a problem because there are so many ways into this web, and this web is so connected that if you sort of rip it apart at one point, it might collapse the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So bring on regulations. so that is what has happened, at least over here in Europe, is that the use of outsourcing partners or third parties have become and is becoming increasingly more stringent, regulated. So you have the operational resilience framework coming into play in a couple of years. You have new guidelines from the European Banking Authority. You have new guidelines from the European Occupational Pension and Insurance Authority, and they're all sort of coming out with their guidelines, and there are basically minimum requirements on how you should do information security. And a big part on that now is how you deal with your third parties or your vendors. And they're even talking about requirements that if you want to use a third party, in the agreement with this third party, there has to be a clause that allows the regulating bodies, the governmental regulating bodies within the EU, to actually audit the third party. So it's not going to be easy to be a third party provider in the future, or it's not going to be easy to sort of acquire third party services. But we have made ourselves extensively more dependent on partners and third parties to provide our end product. And we are extensively more intertwined with our different supply chains and delivery chains and ecosystems. So I think there is a mutual dependence there that makes us share a mutual risk in the end. So it's
you're all in this together.
We're all in this together. Yeah.
Right, for better or for worse. So that's interesting perspective. So let me ask you this: do you feel that the regulations that have emerged, do you feel that they're responsive? Do you think they're more proactive? Do you think they're future facing? Are they providing more of a guidance and kind of a roadmap for becoming more secure, mature, better, providing better risk posture for both you and your suppliers or your vendors? Or do you feel it's more of a reaction to things that have happened in the past? Kind of people are looking at the rear view mirror when they're creating these legislative initiatives. Do you feel it's a help? Do you think it's a hindrance? And you mentioned a minimum set of conditions that someone has to comply with. Does that match your risk appetite? Do you feel it's a bare minimum that needs to be kind of enhanced with your own requirements? And do you have the vehicle within your contract to go beyond just a bare minimum? Can you ask for more?
When looking at the regulations, I would say that they are more reactive. Because, like I said, technology is moving. Enter the fintech companies, enter the third-party payment providers, and all of a sudden someone realizes, hey, there is a risk that has emerged here, and we weren't aware that risk even existed. We need to regulate. Mm-hmm. So it's more like of an afterthought or something that comes as a product of something than anything proactive. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you consider a normal business, and if you go back a few years when IT wasn't, well, IT was for the nerds. If you look at a company, then you would see that the people in top management, there were absolutely not a single person with a technical background in that position. And IT was something that was managed by IT. And where did IT sit? They sat in the basement. They weren't seen, but they were just doing things. And the phone rang and the faxes faxed and the printers printed. And that was, IT just made sure that this happened, and that was it. So there was nothing else to IT. And I think that if you fast forward then to today, or maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that was how outsourcing partners was seen as well. So the top management, they were sort of, okay, we're going to take all this stuff that is not our core business, and we're just going to outsource it. So it's almost like letting IT handle it, but now it's just like company A or company B that happens to be very far away from us will handle it. And without realizing that's actually, no, it's that's not how it works. You are still responsible for what happens there. And if this goes wrong, then you're the one that's stuck with a problem, not IT or this sort of third party. So I think that this is also a part of becoming more mature in seeing the bigger picture and how everything is connected. So I will say yes. The regulations that I've seen so far and how we go about them is more as a reactive control and an afterthought, and something that was made sort of looking ahead. But there might be a silver lining here as well, because the coming frameworks, at least in Europe, that goes around operational resilience, they seem to finally be looking sort of preventive more than reactive in terms of control to build the resilience. So So yeah, I think that everything is moving really fast now, but even the regulating bodies and the directives are also sort of speeding up their own process. So maybe we are getting somewhere.
That sounds great. Well, I mean, that, like I said, there's a silver lining there. At least it gets everybody to think about security, it gets everybody to think about risk, and then kind of enables you to have that conversation with both, within your environment and also with third parties. What about leadership? So you mentioned, getting folks to understand within the business, there's no technical leadership, or at least there hasn't been for a long time, and folks tend to be more on the business side, financial services side. How do you have that conversation? How do you get them to understand about third-party risk, what it means that we may not own these things, but the risk still belongs to us, that we are ultimately responsible because it's our name on the brand? How do you start that conversation? How do you sustain that conversation to make sure that they continue to pay attention, invest resources, support your vision for bringing third-party risk, kind of, making it an essential part of your program?
Yeah. Well, there is a lot to be said about media, and especially in the last 12 months, there has been a lot to be said about media. But I think that in terms of specifically this issue, media is actually helping to a certain extent, because they have a very high focus on information security these days and about data privacy, for example. So I think that the media watchdog is putting examples and putting sort of top-level managers and companies to shame if they haven't done their homework in terms of security and privacy. And none of the managers wants to be sort of in that chair or in that headline in terms of this. So I think we get a lot of help there. But looking at my own career, I was I'm trained as an engineer in computers, computer science. And I started working in a technical role. Somewhere along the way, I did an MBA and sort of taught myself the business speech. And I would say that is probably the best investment that I've done in my cybersecurity career so far. So it wasn't all the technical courses that I took or the engineering training. It was actually the business training that has proven to be the most valuable, at least at my current level. So I believe that talking the business language is getting a bit old now saying that, but it is very important, and you have to translate your concerns into something that actually impacts or benefits or translates to the business needs. And I would say that the work you do around security, you should always support the business strategy. So if you can come to top management with your concerns, you can speak of them in terms of risk, and you can address them to the business strategy, then you're going somewhere. Then you will have their attention, you will have attention from the board, and it's a lot easier to sort of get an acceptance and understanding of where you want to go.
That's very interesting feedback. I think we've seen the emergence of this kind of an idea that security leaders should really be leaders first, and really, security, they bring security in as their expertise, but really leadership comes first, and you have to approach things from a business value perspective of risk and security. What does it do for the business? How do we support the business? How do we enable the business? Kind of embed security in, and everybody talks about it, but how do you actually do it? And I think you've just given us one of the perfect answers, which is you become about the business. You become a business person yourself, and then you gain that credibility in not just the technical conversations, but the business conversations. And
exactly, yeah. I know, but there's another thing as well, and that is that if you are to take an informed decision, you need to understand what it is you're making a decision on. Mm-hmm. And if you are presented with options and you're being told, okay, we'll give you 3 options, you need to evaluate them and you need to make a decision. If you don't understand what you're looking at, how can you make an informed and a good decision? Mm-hmm. So I think it's also important that as a CISO, you must have the technical know-how at some level. I mean, you don't have to be both a security awareness specialist, a ethical hacker, and maybe a cloud architect, but you need to have some sort of grasp of everything. So it definitely pays to come from a technical background and to have been in the trenches, but you won't succeed unless you can speak business as a CISO. So it's a bit of a
true CISO.
Yeah. Becoming a CISO overnight is not something you do, I think. Well, you can become one overnight, but become a successful one overnight. It's at some point you will be undressed and it might not be pretty.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think, one of the sort of the narrative devices that I've used in the past is tell my fellow peers that, the C and the O might be silent in the CISO title because, frequently it's a courtesy title and it's bestowed on folks, that might be in a very technical role. And, when speaking to the talent management community right now, I think one of the emerging things that we're seeing, at least here in the US, is the expectation for CISOs to be very, very technical. And to kind of maintain that technical credibility, we're seeing a lot of titles, where they say CISO, hands-on CISO, which it's real difficult to understand what that means until you start reading the descriptions, and you realize they're really looking for kind of a chief architect or a chief engineer who's still very much embedded within the technology space, still continues to be very hands-on, and it sort of detracts from the vision of CISO as an actual leader. Right, the chief officer of a company and really belonging to a C-suite in a true way. And there's only one way to get in there is build credibility, maintain that credibility, make sure that you're included in those decisions, which leads me to the next question. Do you feel that you're empowered, or should a CISO be empowered to make decisions or at least recommend decisions at the level of the business decision? So if you're onboarding a new payment provider or a third-party vendor and you feel that their security posture does not match your risk appetite, what can you do? What should you be able to do? Should be able to stop the deal, pull the deal, or what are your options, and what do you think your options should be?
Well, I believe that as a CISO, your role is to be the expert advisor. So you should definitely not be the one that says go or no go, but you should be the one that sort of gives the best advice to the people that owns the risk. So and that would be the business. So in my CISO role, I have a mandate, and I have the ability to pull the plug. For example, if I see something that's an emerging incident, it would typically not be an acquisition, but if there is an incident emerging on the network, for example, threatening a production system or something that usually needs to be up 100% of the time, I am able to take that down at will. And but then the decision can be reversed, of course, by the business later at a later point. But this is sort of disaster or crisis management tool. But I believe that it is the business owners, and in turn the risk owners, that should be the ones that decide go or no go. And that is what they're paid for, to take these decisions. And that is why I love this question that says, well, what keeps you awake at night? Mm-hmm. And usually I sleep very well because I do not own the risk. Mm-hmm. The guy over there with the suit and the tie that's more expensive than my suit and tie is the one that owns the risk. So I've given my advice, and he can lie awake and ponder my advice, and then in the morning he has to make a decision. So, but I see that from the trusted advisor into sort of more an active participant in business decisions, it'll be very interesting the next 5 years, because I think the CISO role is sort of sliding into the executive committee inch by inch. At the moment, I think the trusted advisor is the right sort of identification for the role, but in the future, I'm not sure.
That's very interesting. Well, yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of that sort of pent-up frustration within the CISO ranks, where they're not really being included in the decision loop, and it's more of a trusted advisor. You hope trusted, but certainly an advisor, where you kind of submit your opinion and sort of sit back and wait for the decision to be made sort of outside of your purview, and then of course you're left to deal with the consequences. So when a decision is actually made against your recommendation, you still have to secure whatever has been brought into your environment and kind of deal with it, support the business, enable the business, and we've heard the phrase come alongside the business and let it happen, which is a little tough, right?
Yeah, but and I think that is it is a distinction there between what you described earlier as the more glorified security engineer, which is like, yeah, we want a CISO, so we want you to wear a suit and a tie, but we want you to have the Phillips screwdriver in your back pocket and go fix the servers.
Right. That
person will never be the trusted advisor. That person will still be considered IT. And IT, the only purpose with IT is to make the phone ring and the printer sprint and the internet up and running. So definitely, as long as the role is still sort of seen as the technician and not seen as vital to the business or the strategy, it sits too low, and it will not be able to properly address the cyber risks, because we're talking about something completely different here. I mean, IT operations and cyber risk, those two things are miles apart. And until the top management understands that and actually pulls up the advisor to a level that actually inflicts on the business strategy, they might be set up for a big failure. Look at SolarWinds or Target or what have you.
Right. Which is interesting because they are themselves a vendor, a security technology vendor. And of course, leaning into technology did not serve them all that well. And, not paying attention to risk, especially risk that proliferates beyond your own enterprise into your customers' environments. I mean, that's sort of the death knell of any vendor. And of course, it's going to be really difficult to recover for them. But I'm less worried about their brand, and I'm more worried about what it says about our industry, right? And if this is still this thinking that permeates the upper echelon of power within the enterprise, then, we still have some work to do. And I think you've sort of laid out the roadmap for the next 5 years. And, you're certainly doing your part to elevate the role of the CISO and kind of change the perspective on what it means to be one and what kind of value you bring to the enterprise and to the leadership echelon. So, it gives hopes to us all, of course, that it is possible. Obviously, you've traveled that trajectory and you are where you are today by having that sort of a strategic mindset about what it means to be a CISO, to be in that role. But I think a lot more folks need to kind of come along to that type of thinking. And, if we continue to work and become more credible, deliver more value to the business, make it about the business, so not being the gatekeepers of technology, gatekeepers of risk, and, sort of putting our thumb on the scale every time and saying, no, you can't do this because it's too risky. The job is really not necessarily that. The job is to enable the business and figure out how to do it together better and become a more secure, more mature environment. So that's definitely a different approach that I think a lot of the folks in the space have taken historically.
I think we will see more and more of it going forward. I've seen some trends and I've seen other companies heading in that direction. Myself, I'm currently hiring a head of security operations, and I'm branching out part of my group risk. So the first line of defense will now be actually managed by what most people will call a CISO then, but it will be the head of security operations, which will actually run the technical controls on the network with his or her team. Then I can focus on the strategy. I can focus on vendor management. I can focus on the proactive controls and the compliance issues, and making sure that we are within our risk appetite, because that is something that I couldn't do when I was running around with a fire extinguisher and or whacking down every mole. Right. So yeah, I think that this is and going into 100% digital world has to be done this way. It has to be done this way, and yeah, but it'll be interesting, and it's been a journey. So, and the journey isn't over, but it's a very interesting journey to be a part of. That's for sure.
That's excellent. Well, our work is never done. Security never sleeps, as we say, and you've got some exciting times ahead. And I'm thankful for your insight, and thank you for sharing it with us today. Appreciate your time. Good luck in the future. We hope to see you again. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me.